Hello and welcome. This is a recording of Chris Claremont, who was interviewed at Bogforum 2023 in November. It is from two different interviews, and I tried to get the best from both of them. But hope you will enjoy it.
For some reason, we were in the middle of a war, which I opposed back then, and of course, nobody listened, but who listens to a 17-year-old? And I loved acting, I loved writing. I figured since they're both incredibly difficult to make a living with, I'd try them both and see what happened. And I was a good actor and I actually got jobs. But writing not only paid a little bit more, but paid a little more often, so I stuck with writing. Who knew?
Who knew? And
but both my children are political theorists, sort of. And they're having a great time, so what goes around comes around, just not always the way one thinks.
And it was while you were at college that you started getting into the writing of comics, isn't that right?
While I was at college, I got hired as what they now call a paid intern. In my day, we were called gophers, which is short for go for this, go for that, whatever. And Stan Lee was trying to tell me when we spoke that he couldn't hire me because I was only available for 2 months, and Marvel was a very poor company. They had enough trouble paying their regular staff. There was no way he could pay someone who was only going to be there for such a short amount of time. And I said, well, sir, actually, I'm doing this for academic credit. I'm not allowed to ask for wages. You're hired. Which is a policy that Marvel has continued to this very day. Only with its hired help, not with interns.
And when you started there, did you have a relationship with the Marvel comics already? Did you read them, or did you love them? Was it like a great thing for you to start working at Marvel at the time?
I mean, I grew up reading English comics, Dan Dare and the like. I thought European, if I'd known Valerian was coming, if I'd known Mézières was going to be doing such brilliant work, I'd have stayed in Europe. American comics, for the most part, were incredibly boring. Until I read The Fantastic Four by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And I thought, this is interesting. And then I bought another, and another, and another, and another. And the next thing I knew, I was spending $2 a month buying comic books. They were much less expensive in those days. And I thought this was cool. And I came to work for Marvel purely by accident, and I figured I'll just stick around and see what happens next. And so I would keep sending pitch proposals, ideas to them, and they would keep ignoring them until one day they actually bought one. And then they bought another and another, and here I am, 55 years later. Stan's philosophy was, if you got assigned to a series, the 3 rules were don't be a pain in my ass, get the books in on time, and write good work. And from Stan's perspective as boss, any 2 out of 3, you kept your job. He'd like all 3, but he was willing to settle. And that was it. When you had a series, you could do whatever you wanted, so long as it was within the Comics Code Authority, which were the people who overlooked all American comics in those days, and you were on your own. As Stan put it, I have too much trouble and responsibility keeping the company solvent. I don't want to have to spend time telling you how to write your book. If you didn't know how to write a book, if you did not turn your work in on time, if you did poor work, he'd just fire you and get somebody else. And the way it worked for me was I was working on staff as an assistant editor, which is basically down here. This is the editor, this is the assistant. And I would submit pitches, and one day Roy Thomas came in, held up a stack of paper and said, this is at 6 o'clock in the evening. And he said, I need this written by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Who wants it? And I got my hand up first. So I had to write 17 pages. The book was already drawn, it was already plotted. I just had to write the dialogue for it because the original writer didn't have time. And I got it in. If I had not gotten it in, if I'd gotten it in at lunchtime, let's say, 12 o'clock, that was it. I was off the radar. But I got it in on time. It was acceptable. So I went to the head of the queue for the next time there was a disaster that needed somebody to fix it. And that's how it worked. I wrote novellas that were published in Marvel Comics. I wrote novelettes. I did what would generously be called, well, I can't use the word in public, but it has 4 letters and is, it was fun, but it was not great art. No. You're just doing in your time as learning one's craft the old-fashioned way by just doing it over and over and over again. The same way young editors did it at all the major publishing houses in New York. You write a story, you fix other people's story, you write another story, and you get to the point where, oh, now I can write a novel, and it either gets accepted or not.
And so at some point, you were offered to do something more continuously than just the fill-in stories. Or someone snipped off a book and you were... But I want to talk about, before we get to that, I love War's Hell. Perhaps you didn't.
Oh, no, it was a lot of fun. All 5 issues.
Yeah. Could have had more. But
if only World War II had the same idea. 5 days and we're out.
But that seemed, and still today seems very political, the stories that you did in War's Hell. And also very concerned with justice and injustices. Was that was that just something that you got to do, or did you have to push and pull to have these stories?
No, the series was created originally by the person who at the time was my boss at Marvel, Tony Isabella. Ironically, 5 years earlier, when I was a gopher, Tony had sent in a submission to Marvel that I rejected. So when I came to work for him, he gave me a little note that went on the front of my desk saying, I rejected Tony Isabella's first submission to Marvel, and look where I am today, his assistant. No. And then he gave it to me, and I was on my own.
So nobody questioned that you...
No. I got my book in on time. The stories were legible. You know, not a problem. The book didn't sell, which is why we got fired, why it got canceled. But no, it was Stan's rules. I was not a pain in his ass. But, I mean, the thing about World War II, aside from all the history, is that America and, well, DC and Marvel both published World War II stories. Sergeant Fury on our side of the table, Sergeant Rock on their side of the table. But it was all about Americans. Despite my accent, I'm English. I thought that was boring. So I decided for War is Hell, and we couldn't say hell in comics, so we always had to refer to it as War is Heck. I wanted to show what was happening to people we never saw anything about in American comics. So there was a story about a young woman who was married to a Japanese officer. She was Chinese, he was Japanese. How did she feel about the fact that the Japanese were destroying China? I did a story about the Russian invasion of Finland. You say that to most American students, huh? What's Finland? It's a country. Where? No, but it was always my goal was to present the stories from the perspective of people that Americans don't often read about, and see how it went. The last issue, which was drawn by Herb Trimpe, who was one of the best storytellers ever at Marvel Comics. He was the last penciler who was taught by Jack Kirby how to tell comic book stories. But he didn't do pretty figures, he did brilliantly told stories. So over the years he was pushed aside, which is for me a tragedy for the industry and for you readers. But the last story we did was about Italian troops in North Africa, trying to figure out, why are we doing this? What's going on? Why do we have to help the Germans? This isn't fair. And at the end, it comes to a nice resolution. But it's, as I said, it's trying to give Americans a different perspective. One of the last stories I told, one of the last pieces I did as a political theorist, was why we should not be in Vietnam, which was not a good thing to say in 1970. But you win some, you lose some.
So a cover that is before you started writing.
Well, that was for Giant Size #1, which was written by the man who created most of the new X-Men. Len Wein, worked together with artist Dave Cockrum, who is one of the most brilliant, creative visualists in Marvel history and comics history.
Great designer, great storyteller.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is 1975. This is when you, like just after this, you get hired.
Started in 1974. I was working then as, Len was editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. I was his associate editor, which meant the two of us ran the whole shop, which was kind of cool.
I mean, it must have been. And so many of these characters were new. All the ones you see bursting through the page there, except the one in the back with the Cyclops, were new. They were newly created characters. It was a revamp of the X-Men, which has of course existed since the early 60s, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And these were new characters. And how do you get what was your take on the X-Men at this point, when you started writing?
Well, the irony is that my contribution to the X-Men actually began in 1969 when Roy Thomas and Neil Adams were drawing their arc on the series. And in this, there's a three-part confrontation between the X-Men and the Sentinels. And by the end of that arc, the Sentinels were destroying the X-Men. They were just winning hand over fist. And Roy was trying to find out a way to end the story. And so I was there as a young punk, 18-year-old, no, 18-year-old, sorry, assistant. I was just what we called then a gopher. Now they would be called, a gopher, which meant I would do all the manual labor in the shop. And so they were just talking about, how do we end this? And I said, well, Mr. Thomas, excuse me, but science theorizes that all mutation is derived from solar radiation. So if you want to get rid of the mutants, get rid of the sun. And the next thing we knew, Neil had drawn this absolutely classic full-page splash
of the sun, which was so huge it didn't even fit on the page. You just saw little bits of solar corona up in the corners, and the sentinels pouring into its surface. So I got started with that in, as I said, 1969. And then when Len and Dave were trying to figure out at the end of Giant Size #1 how to get rid of Krakoa, I said, well, what's an island? It's the top of a mountain that's underwater. So how do you get rid of it? Well, you've got 13 X-Men, just cut off the top of the mountain, have Storm and Polaris just neutralize gravity and blow it out of the, leave it, the Earth is orbiting, spinning on its axis, Krakoa gets left behind, give it an hour, it's outside of the atmosphere. Islands don't have arms, they can't hold on to things, they just went by. And the more time passed, the more the island floated away into space and split apart. And that was that. And I thought Krakoa would never come back.
Little did you know.
Little did I know.
Yeah, Krakoa is the living island, the sentient island that is now featuring very heavily in the X-Men comics.
Well, not then.
Not then.
Now it's the dominant, it's the stage.
Yeah, exactly.
Supreme of all the stories.
Let's see if I can make this work. So I want to get into sort of specific themes also in connection with the books that have just been republished in hardcover.
And they look gorgeous. You should go out and buy 2 copies at least. One to read, one to put on your shelf because it looks
Exactly. And I think it's fair to say that you're most famous, if you want to pick one story arc or one sort of, it is this. It's the story of the Phoenix, of Jean Grey and the Phoenix. And we have here the creation of the Phoenix. Jean Grey was one of the original X-Men created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and she gets an upgrade in this story, which is X-Men 100 and 101, and this is from that issue of this, from 101. And
she looks great.
Yeah, and this is drawn by Dave Cockrum. And this, can you tell something? I mean, what you and Dave, I presume, talked about Jean, and tried to figure out what to do with her.
Dave did upwards of 40 designs. There were at least a dozen different designs, and then we tried different colors. Is the belt down here? Does she have a cape? Does she have a hat? Does she, is it a skirt? Is it skin tight? And we would put it all together, and does this look nice? Does that look nice? No, that looks incredibly ugly. We won't use that one. But we did, years later. And you pick the one that sings the most to your heart as a reader. And it's like, wow, I love that one. We'll put it on the book. I'll buy the book. And that was what we came up with.
Yeah, and she does get like a power upgrade, a consciousness upgrade in this connection. I mean, she goes from being a telepath, has telekinetic abilities, but becomes super powerful. What was the thinking? You bring, in a way, I think I have an image of it here. I want to, that is one of the jumps here.
No, there it is. Oh, no, that's a whole
something different. This, on the left, you see the introduction of Jean Grey, drawn by Jack Kirby, and with words by Stan Lee, where they're all ogling her, the other X-Men. They're very young. That's one of the concepts of the X-Men, isn't it? They're very young. And she's become sort of a slightly undervalued member, one might say.
Well, every team in Marvel Comics, whether it was the X-Men or the Avengers or the Fantastic Four, always had a girl. How do you know it was a girl? Because it was Marvel Girl, and Invisible Girl, and that was DC, Saturn Girl. They were all girls. Occasionally you had a boy, Superboy, but he became Superman. You never saw Supergirl become Superwoman. And I'm sorry, I knew lots of cool women, and they were not girls, they were women. And I figured it would be the analogy of drawing everybody in Denmark the size of a hobbit. You don't have very many tiny people here. They're all like, they make the rest of the world feel tiny. And I think that's really cool. But you need to write more stories about them. So I was writing more stories about women because no one else was.
Yeah, and the female characters become very powerful. Several of them, they're often the most powerful.
Why should a female character be any less powerful than Superman?
Sure.
Or any less smart than Batman, or any less terrifying than Dr. Doom? It's just, the gender is not a part of this. The character is a part of this. Jean as Phoenix is one of the primal creative entities in the omniverse. It's like, in my vision, you have God, and then you have Phoenix down here, because when creation comes to an end, Dark Phoenix consumes it, but then you wait 7 seconds and Phoenix comes back and we're off and running for round 2.
And I think this was one of your contributions to American superhero comics, genre comics, I think in general, to give it these interesting, nuanced female characters that had been neglected. That existed, but they've been neglected. The other one is your examination of the characters and their inner lives. And I think this is one of your very fine moments from this period. I'm sorry, I hope I'm not embarrassing you, but I think this is really a very, very fine moment where a character you had written, Miss Marvel, Carol Danvers, had been written by some other people and had undergone quite an absurd story where she was raped by her own child. I mean, it was let's not get into that.
There's no tactful way to describe it. It was just... You look at the story and my reaction was, oh, for goodness sakes.
Yeah. And you pointed that out to the readers in this sequence where she confronts her teammates in the Avengers. It's not the X-Men now, it's the Avengers, who all just were sort of, ooh, how lovely, you're pregnant. And she was raped, but you're pregnant, and how wonderful, and let's like knit a little pillow for them and whatever. But what you're doing here is you're talking about her inner life, and she's explicating it. I mean, there's quite a lot of text here. You're also giving it to the reader. You're sort of saying, okay, there's actually a lot going on here, and you're foregrounding that by writing. And that's at least my interpretation of it.
The key thing to bear in mind here is, aside from the fact that Michael Golden is an absolutely brilliant artist and storyteller, he also, these two...
Owned by Michael Golden.
Michael Golden. This demonstrates why. Because we both knew that this is the important scene. This is where she has to explain what the heck is going on. So Michael takes... We both knew there was going to be a lot of text there. But Michael takes the moments where she is going to explain things. And if you notice the first panel on the right-hand page, all the art is over here on one side of the panel. The left side of the panel is dead space. Nothing is there. Why? Because the text is going to be there. That is how a writer and an artist can integrate the storytelling to a point where the reader, hopefully, is not, oh my gosh, there's so many words there, it's destroying the art. No, the art is there. But then you cut to the reaction shot of her friends in the Avengers, who are being told brutally and ruthlessly, you screwed up, and I paid the price. Have a nice day, heroes. That needs no text whatsoever. Why? Because we're seeing how they react, as you people are reacting here. If I were writing this scene, I would not need to describe how you are feeling, because your faces, your body language say it all. What I'm saying up here is boring talk. That goes in the first panel. Your reaction goes in the second panel. More talk goes in the third panel, where we see the reaction of Professor Xavier and Spider-Woman. And then the last panel is just the wrap-up, where we see her doing a normal thing, reaching down and picking up the bottle that she threw to the floor, but we see the reaction of one of her friends, the Beast. That's what comics is all about. Finding a way to tell a story visually, but that works in parallel with, that complements the text that goes with it. If you do it right, nothing is covered of nothing essential is covered. If you screw it up we get lots of letters from readers saying, you made a mistake. And we go, and then he fixed it next issue.
So, to continue with the story of Jean, she becomes corrupted, seduced, drawn to her dark side, one might say, by a supervillain, it turns out. But he presents us this very handsome gentleman, Jason Wingard. And this is when you're working with John Byrne.
Yes.
Can you say something about that collaboration?
It was fun while it lasted.
Right. It was really where the X-Men took off as this phenomenon.
The X-Men took off with
Dave.
With Dave.
Right.
I mean, we took off from the very first step. It's just the company didn't find out about it for 6 months.
Right.
In the same manner that when Roy and Neil Adams did their run on the X-Men in 1969, the sales rocketed. But Marvel didn't find out about it until 9 months later because the reporting was so slow. And by that time, Neil had gone back to DC Comics.
Yeah.
Here, we got the news a little faster, and we knew that the X-Men was on a roll. And then when Dave, for various reasons, left his work on the book, John was waiting there. I want this book.
Right. But it's a different collaboration with like different sensibilities in a way. You feel, I think, with your work, you always feel your sensibility, but you also feel how you're opening up to your collaborators.
It's a synergy. Dave, like me, viewed the world in 70mm widescreen. It's like going to the Megaplex and looking at Star Wars where, wow. John worked much more focused in. He was a much more rational artist. Dave and I were just crazy. John told much more centered and brilliant visual stories, and much cleaner visual stories. Here, if you look at these pages, the camera's all in medium range. And he pulls back, he moves in, but it's all on the same level. Dave would probably have the camera flying all over the place, much like
Jack Kirby. Much wilder type of layouts here.
There you go.
Yeah. Expressive, much more expressive.
It's much more from the heart.
It's an analytical element to...
It's not analytical, it's all, it's gut.
No, but to Byrne.
Yeah, Byrne is a much more focused, analytical, no less brilliant in his own way, no less eloquent in his own way. It's just different. And Michael Golden, actually, if you look at the Michael Golden pages, he's actually a fascinating blend of the two because you have the intimacy, but there are other pages in that issue that are just wow.
Yeah. The splash page with the Scarlet Witch.
Among other places.
So I wanted to touch about something because, of course, the X-Men is the story of a minority group that's hounded and hated and misunderstood by the outside world. But it's also very glamorous.
Well, it's a story about love.
Yeah.
It's always a story about love.
Yeah. And the story about Jean is a story of love. And I just wanted to touch about this, but there's also an erotic undercurrent in this. I think that you also really, I mean, it's not that it hadn't been really comics before.
No.
But it's, of course, always been present in comics.
Erotic is in the mind of the beholder.
Sure. There is like the Hellfire Club, which is this sort of gentleman's club, which also is run by mutants. It's turned.
You have to blame that on the English. I mean, that's their fault.
There's a lot of people getting tied up and put in cages.
It was a real, if any of you saw the original Steed and Mrs. Peel Avengers, I will say no more, since I am English.
I just wonder whether, you and John, I don't know, like to what extent you thought about this while you were creating the stories.
Oh no, we never thought. We just
of course. Right. Okay. Point taken.
No. It's like any creative endeavor. You have an initial impulse, and then you find the right way to make it work.
Yeah.
And that's how it works.
Right.
And it works until it doesn't.
Sure.
And that's why Jack Kirby left Stan Lee to go to DC Comics, because he would create all these ideas on the page, and Stan's primary job as writer and editor was to erase 90% of them and focus in on the idea that told the story best and sold the book best. Jack was really pissed because, what about all these other ideas? Well, we'll get to them later. The heck with you. So he went to DC Comics and created New Gods. And I remember reading New Gods and thinking, this is brilliant. There are like 12 wonderful ideas here. I want to see what happens next. Next issue comes out. Oh my God, there are 12 brand new ideas here, plus the 12 that came last issue. Wow, what the heck happens next? Third issue. Oh my God, there are another 12 brilliant ideas. He did this for 7 issues until DC management's head exploded, literally. And they said, this is driving us all crazy. And Jack was so upset with them that he left DC and went back to Marvel. The punchline being writers and storytellers at DC lived off of these ideas for the next 30 years.
Still doing
They still do. It sounds silly, but surprisingly, great ideas can be easy. The trick is getting them to make sense on paper in a way that makes the audience want to see what happens next. And that's why a lot of creative collaborations don't last that long, because somebody always wants to be first. It's my idea. No, it's my idea. Why did you cut my idea? Why did you cut my idea? The heck with you. Well, the heck with you too. Dark Phoenix is a serious, a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that there seems to be a contrast between the Jean that you see in that scene where she's under control and she's loving, and then there's something else takes over.
It's not something else, it's just, as Jean says in the final issue of the story, it will take me 1 billion years to get control of this power. But if somewhere along the line, if at any point in that 1 billion years, for that 1 billion years, I will have to
Have that here.
stay in absolute, total control of myself. I cannot let anything slip. But if one more person dies because of it, I mean, the whole point of Dark Phoenix is that she flies across the galaxy, she's hungry, she grabs a snack. What is the snack? It's a star. The star has an inhabited planet with 6 billion people on it. She doesn't care. It's not like they're anywhere. She's the equivalent of us standing next to a piece of sand on the beach. Do we care what happens to the sand? No. It's just, we'll dig it up, we'll throw it in the water, we'll have fun. There is no, but for her, for Jean, what she did was an immoral act. She killed. She will never get over that, and God help her if she does it again. And her decision was, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to say, this is the end, I'm done, I'm out of here. She has to grow to reach that level. But for her, the cost of the time it takes to grow and reach that level is too great.
Can you say something about what happened? Because this is very famous. You've told the story many times, but not everyone might be familiar with it. But she ended up dying.
So in the original story, she ended up being punished and losing her powers and then coming back.
That's what we see on the left here. That is the later published, the original.
But the reality is, once you establish a character, you'll always come back to it. And if we kept coming back to Dark Phoenix, it would diminish the power of the story and destroy her as a character. And at the same time, Editor-in-Chief Jim Shooter pointed out that you can't kill 9 billion people and get away with a slap on the wrist. I mean, I would have liked to have gone that way, but we never thought of it because we didn't think it would be permitted. So Jim said, no, you got to do it. So the choice was she either goes to jail for the rest of creation, or she gets killed. And from my perspective as a writer, I wanted to bring the story to an absolute end, so I just killed her.
How do you feel about having to make that decision today and what it meant for the development of the character? And
I thought it was absolutely the right decision.
Right.
I thought resurrecting her was a disaster, but that's
which happened like only a few years later.
Yeah.
Other writers.
But that's the thing about a publishing reality such as Marvel's or DC. No decision lasts forever. You can have the current Marvel universe as of last year, I believe, is coming to an end, and they're starting over. Well, that may make perfect publishing sense, but if you love the stories that are in that universe, you're going to feel, then what the heck did I buy the book for? I mean, for me, what I loved about Marvel, what I loved about Stan Lee's creation of Marvel was that everything had a consequence. Everything moved forward from a set point, and it was all quote unquote real. DC was the place where everything just nothing mattered. That's Hugh Jackman's reaction to being told that the movie won't be made for another 2 years.
He really took off.
Hugh Jackman?
Well, him too. And you did the first spin-off.
Yep.
X-Men spin-off title, limited series with Frank Miller.
It's amazing what stories you can come up with when you're stuck in traffic on I-5 right next to the San Onofre nuclear plant. So the car's not moving for 4 hours. Customs and immigration's running around looking for illegal immigrants who are running around trying not to get caught. And I'm pitching this story to Frank, and Frank's telling me, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this either. Let's do Japan. I love Japan. And there we go. Oh, and meanwhile we're looking between the highway and the high tide mark of the Pacific Ocean is a nuclear plant with four nuclear reactors in it. And we're thinking, what sort of moron does that? You know, but not my problem. Yeah, no, this was wonderful.
Can you describe that collaboration? What was it like compared to the other things you did?
Wonderful.
Did it write itself? How did it?
I pitched an idea to Frank. Frank pitched an idea to me. We talked about it, stuck in traffic for 2 or 3 hours. I went home, wrote the story, pitched it to Marvel. Marvel approved it. I wrote my traditional first issue plot, which was 20 pages of material for a 20-page book. Frank must have taken a look at it and gone, ah! And by the time we got to the 4th issue, Frank and I talked on the phone for 20 minutes. I wrote two-thirds of a page stack of notes, sent it off. He sent the art back, and we were done.
Marvel style.
Well, yeah. But Frank specifically went through the book going, Claremont's a blabbermouth. He'll write lots of words. I will give him. I'll give him lots of dead space that he can fill with words. I looked at the pages, and I looked at this page, and thought, what the heck can I say? I'm not gonna cover anything. I don't need to cover anything. Frank is brilliant. There's just no other way of putting it. It's really annoying.
This page was incredibly shocking to me when I read it as a kid. Introduced some realism there. It's Wolverine meeting his
woman that he loves has just gotten punched.
Yeah.
Punched out by her fiancé. A marriage made in.
Yeah. And Wolverine is about control and loss of control, isn't he?
Yeah. But the true irony is, if you go 5 pages earlier in the story, you will find this magnificent image of Mariko drawn by Frank. And you look at that, and it's like, wow. And you look at this, and you go, ah. Only because she's been beaten and she's supposed to look awful. And this is all about Wolverine trying to find a way to rescue the woman he loves. And in the process, he discovers a woman who loves him, and who in a different reality he might have loved as well, except that Aurora made her first. And that's Yukio. nothing in my books is simple. I try to make it as complicated as possible, simply because life is like that.
Yeah. Can you say what is it that makes Wolverine so popular, do you think?
Haven't a clue.
No clue.
Anyone out here, can anyone tell me why you like Wolverine? Well, that answers that question.
Yeah. What was your contribution to the character, would you say?
Everything?
Yeah, I mean, he was fairly one note in this, initially. He was this out of
But because he was just, that was all we had. But then the next question was, why?
Yeah.
How old is he? What has he seen? What has he learned? What has he done? What effect has it had on him as a person? In Len Wein's original conception, the claws came out of the glove. That's why you have these three big housings on the back of the glove. Like Iron Man's armor, anyone can wear the glove. If you can wear the glove, you're basically Wolverine. Then one day Dave Cockrum walked in, and on the back of the page he'd drawn a hand with a fist, and the claws are coming out of the back of his fist. And I looked at that and I thought, that is the most disgusting thing I have ever seen. That is so cool. And we did it. And that changed everything, because once the claws are a part of him, the next question is, where'd they come from? Why are they there? Who would do such an awful thing? Wolverine must be really pissed. And then you go on to figure out what are the next step, what is the next consequence? Well, he has a healing factor. Okay, that's how the claws got put on him. But what are the claws? They're adamantium, the strongest fictional metal known. But if you integrate the adamantium into his skeleton, where does he get his blood? How does the corpuscles work? Well, he heals himself constantly. But that must take an awful lot out of him. Yes. That's awful. Yes. Well, because the whole point about writing fiction, about writing melodrama, is to take a character who is a hero, or just an ordinary character, and find what makes them vulnerable, and then exploit it again and again and again for the entertainment of the audience. It's a very simple equation. The trick is getting it right. Well, because John's vision of Kitty is totally different from mine. In mine, she is the 50th and last president of the United States, which may come soon, but never mind. Because the United States, in the last year of her second administration, is overthrown by the Sentinels, which sets up Days of Future Past. And things go crazy from there.
She sort of incarnates the X-Men in a way in this very memorable splash page. She's hunted. She's a young person who doesn't know her power. And she also happens to be Jewish.
Kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But who at 13, other than Mozart, has a clue about who they are, or what they are, and where they're going? This is like, I trip, I fall, and the next thing I know, I'm on the ground floor. I fell through the floor. How the heck do I do that? I mean, who do you talk to about that when you're 13? I mean, who do you talk to about that when you're 30? But that's the whole thing, is throwing challenges at our readers. And for me, creating adolescents is important because I want teenage readers. Why? Because they'll stick around with the story, and they'll introduce the story to their kids, and their kids will introduce the stories to their kids. And this isn't funny. I'm working on my 3rd generation of readers. I'm greedy. I want a 4th generation. You cannot imagine what it's like to sit at a signing in Moscow, 5 years ago, and people are coming up in tears because the characters and the stories mean something to them. 51% of the American population is women, and I was thinking, if they're available, I'm going to grab them. And besides, they're much more interesting than men. Sorry. And then
you introduced Kitty Pryde among many characters. And
Well, actually, she was the first.
and it seems today, I don't know if it was such a political thing at the time, but you made her openly Jewish and wore the Star of David.
If you didn't have the little star, if she wasn't wearing that, how would you tell? I challenge everybody to tell me what faith does Captain America follow? What faith does, I don't know, Batman? I mean, you can excuse Kal-El because he's not from around here. Although growing up in Kansas, you could figure out something. Religion is not something we go after very often in comics, but Kitty, it seemed, let's try something that no one's done before in current era. So we did.
Yeah, and she's both a strong female character, but also, besides being a mutant, a minority, unless you're in New York.
Well, but see, here's the secret realization. If you look at this image, you notice in panel 3 and 4, the woman talking to her parents. This is Emma Frost. This is the only time in Emma Frost's, at this point, 40-plus year history with Marvel Comics, that she has ever worn a color that was not white. What was that all about? Huh? This is the only time. Why did she do that? You think, I mean, I've had that subplot sitting on the shelf for 45 years and nobody has noticed. I know exactly why she did it that way, but sorry, you'll just have to wait till I do the story. But there is a story.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, would you?
No, it's fine. But it's just the whole thing of having putting religion on the page, and of course you went back to it and used it as a source also in
But Kurt Wagner, Nightcrawler, is a devout Catholic. I mean, and he's actually died and gone to heaven, so with him it's not hypothesis. As far as he's concerned, as far as he knows, it's reality. He has been to, where all the dead people go. For him, God is not a hypothesis. So, figure that one out.
And then you often use things that are happening.
Shoah, yes.
Yeah, that as well. And you also, this story, where she goes with Magneto to the Holocaust convention, not convention, but the memorial.
But you have to understand, when I was still a political theorist, I spent 2 months in Israel between the Six-Day War and the Second War, which Israel almost lost. There were survivors of the Shoah on the kibbutz where I was working. This was not a hypothesis. I knew people who had been there. When I was, many years later, I was at the opening of the memorial to the Shoah in Paris, France. It was not a casual thing. This is a real event. This is tragically a real event whose survivors are in the last stages of their lives. Most people in this room do not know of it as an event that is part of their lives. Maybe some have parents, grandparents who were part of it. But to say, were you there? Do you know what happened as a personal act? The answer would be no. There are certain things in life that must not be forgotten. Otherwise, the risk exists of us doing it again, which would be a tragedy even greater than the first Shoah. For me, as a creator, to have in Kitty someone who is a child whose grandparents were part of it, but also to have someone like Magneto who experienced it personally, which is part of the scene in Washington. This was a way of talking to the readership and saying, here is something that you must remember. Here is something that you must embrace. Why? To prevent it happening again. And the idea here was that this is the ceremony that she's participating in was a real event. And if we make it real to the characters in the book, by extension they will be real to the readers. And now that, from my perspective, the X-Men is reaching out to its third generation of readers, hopefully that is still holding true. But that was also the genesis of the story in the X-Men graphic novel.
And how do you balance, because Showa is such a, as you said, such a horrific event, but also so real, and it's particularly to people who have family members that experienced. How do you balance putting that in a fantastic story and a fantastic universe? How do you strike that balance when using these events?
I'm often asked, what is my favorite X-Men story? And my answer is, first, what's yours, because that's far more important. But what readers have to understand is that when I don't look at it as this story or that story or the other story. For me, the time I wrote the X-Men from 1974 to 1991 is all one story. It is the lives of these characters. It's like saying, what's the favorite day of your life? What's the favorite thing that happened to you? You have a couple of things that work, that were really impressive to you, but it's all the same life, from beginning to middle to end. You don't think about it separating out the pieces very often. For me, it's a life. For me, these are real people. And my gamble is, if they're real to me, they are more real to you. And if I'm lucky and you fall in love with them, you'll always want to see what happens next. You may not like what happens next, but there'll be another day, and it might get better then. Just like reality. I've always wanted to write the Fantastic Four because that was the book that got me into comics. If there were no FF, I'd be a political theorist in Washington, D.C. Or, I don't know, I'd have an award-winning, show on. Oh, I can't do that, everybody's on strike. Oh. You laugh. I just got a call from Marvel saying, I'm sorry, we're not doing a premiere for the Marvels because everyone's on strike. So much for that idea. You find something in the character, in the story, in the event that, wow, that looks interesting. Let's see where that goes. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if something strikes a chord, you embrace it and see where it leads.
And so when you're writing comics that are, of course, long-running stories, or specifically if it's superhero stories, so how do you plot them? How do you think of where this story should go, and how do you go for the single issue versus the arc?
I follow my instinct. I mean, I'm a storyteller. This is what I do. This is my life. I have often, at least when I was working with Louise Simonson and Ann Nesenti, I'd sit down, we'd go out to lunch, we'd kick ideas back and forth. I would sit there and go, oh God, Weezy, I don't know what to do. I should quit this book. I don't know what. And Weezy said, well, what about this? You did this. What about that? I go, oh wow, yeah, that's a great idea. How did I forget that? And often, it's an ongoing, evolving, kinetic interaction between the writer and the characters, and the writer and the editor. And if you have the right editor and the right person and the right characters, it synergizes. But planning everything out is great, except that invariably what happens is you're 3 issues into this mega story that will eat up the consciousness of the world for the next 2 years, and then 3 issues into it, you have a better idea. Me, I follow the better idea. And I get lots of letters from people saying, and I say, I had a better idea. And then some of the letters say, yeah, you're right. And some of the letters say, no, you didn't. And it's like, as Archie Goodwin, one of the finest editors in comics and a dear friend, not only the finest editor, the finest writer, the finest story, really annoying, who sadly passed on. But as Archie Goodwin used to say when he was boss, okay, you screwed up. You got 30 days to fix it with the next issue. And that's it. Every time you slip on a banana peel, in the 30 seconds before you hit the floor, you've got to come up with a better idea. And if you can't come up with a better idea, you get fired.
How did this come about? I'm the perfect age of the Willow film.
Well, I'd just gotten fired from the X-Men, and I was looking for a new job. And my wife looked at me and said, this is your chance. This is where you sit down and write a really great novel. And at the same time, my dear friend George R.R. Martin was starting a series you may have heard of about, oh, you know, dragons and, oh, you know, they've seen the TV series, oh, leave it alone. And J.K. Rowling was doing this concept about a school. And I sat there and I was starting, I figured this will be a great comic book concept, and I started working on that. And then I got a call and say, hey Chris, we're Bantam Books. Would you like to do a series with George Lucas? What kind of series? A sequel to Willow. Now, I really liked Willow. It was a lot of fun. And I thought, great, I could create a whole world around that. And my wife says, don't do this. Why not? Because you're working for George Lucas. And I said, yeah, I'm working for George Lucas. And she said, you're an idiot. But I'm working for George Lucas. God, you really are an idiot. Never argue with your wife. She's always right. And sat down and we started working. I put the tape in my tape recorder and we started talking. And 45 minutes later, the tape ran out, went ding, and I turned it over and I suddenly realized, is it a bad thing when the plug for the microphone doesn't go all the way into its little socket? I looked at George and George looked at me, can you? So I put the tape back to the original side and I rewound it a little bit and I pressed the button. And George looked at me, and I looked at George, and George said, we're not doing this again. So I plugged it in, turned it over, and we went on for the next 4 hours. I can't even find the tapes anymore. They're at the bottom of my basement, this is where you know that the writer's an idiot. I have 4 hours of tape, me and George Lucas talking about this, and I haven't made a copy. They're sitting in the basement, which is flooded at least twice. You know, but it was a lot of fun, and it sold beautifully. We did really well, and years later, a French publisher, wanted to do a follow-up. Let's see what happens next. And we went to George, went to Skywalker, and they said, well, we'd like to get the rights to do Willow as a TV series. I'm sorry. Go away, we're doing Young Indiana Jones. We haven't time for this. So, there you go. It was fun. The covers are absolutely brilliant because that's exactly what the characters look like in the book. And what you see is what there was. And I had so much hope in the TV series that they'd pick up some of the story. You win some, you lose some. What do you think writers do for their entire lives? Yes. We were down at, what was the store? We were down at Faro this morning, and walking through, and it was like, oh my God. And I'm looking at all these beautiful covers and all these different kinds of stories. And I'm looking at them and saying, I want to write a story like that. I want to write a story like that. There are so many genres I want to grab and create new work by. And I've been trying to do that on and off for the last 20 years. Since even though I'm under contract to Marvel, the contract allows me to do what I want in Europe. And I've been trying to just get stuff going, and every time we do, the company goes out of business. It's like I would do stories for DC, and every time I did a story arc, the editor got fired. It's not that I have a reputation, but apparently I have a reputation. So but it's like everything. You keep trying to get it right, and in the meantime, try to have as much fun as possible, and try and embody that same attitude to the audience. The whole point of being here is to tell stories that you all love. Because if you love them, you'll come back for more, which is great for me. But that's what telling stories is all about. Reaching out to the reader and having them go, I want to see what's on the next page, and turn the page. That's, I have to say, it's what got me hooked in comics with Stan and Jack. It's what got me hooked in novels with Robert Heinlein. I mean, the joke about War of the Worlds is my grandparents knew H.G. Wells. And it's like, how do you argue with that? I gotta, okay, if you're gonna know him, I gotta write better than that. It's what I do. And I'm afraid you're stuck with me until, I run out of stories, which hopefully isn't likely.
Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you so very much for being here.